Deputy Speaker. On this sparsely populated continent, we have been reminded brutally that we are all connected. These connections run deep across Australia. Acknowledgement that wherever we are, this beautiful but harsh environment is both our biggest asset and our biggest threat. And we too are connected not just to the firefighters and professionals who have given so much of their time here in Australia, but those who had never even been to Australia before and with hours' notice jumped on planes to come here to help us. Unavoidable too is that the air we breathe, our impact on our environment and our climate are all connected. No nation, and especially not Australia, can ever again pretend we're just one insignificantly small part of the international climate change challenge. And Australia has been reminded once again that the lessons and connection of our first Australians to this land is essential to our collective survival. Australia has responded as a family, grieved as a family, and grieved as we saw the image of toddler Harvey receive a medal honouring his dad, dressed in a mini rural fire service uniform. Harvey's dad, Geoffrey Keaton, was a volunteer firefighter, and Geoffrey Keaton was awarded a commendation for bravery in service, having died in the Greenwater Creek fire. That was the first media report I read that made me cry about these bushfires. Like any parent, any Australian who's seen that picture of little Harvey, I think it will stay with me for life. It reminds us that the things that guide you in this place aren't just about rational economic costings or where the next dollar is coming from. It's the lessons, the tragedy and hopefully the hope of the national project we call Australia. 33 people have died in these bushfires, 33 people who won't return to family, friends or loved ones. And there's, on top of that, some 150,000 Australians every year who volunteer to protect their communities from the threat of fire. The sacrifice of these brave Australians has saved thousands of properties and thousands of lives. For every one property lost in the fires, some 6 are saved by our firefighters. While it is a time for grieving, I think it is also a time to acknowledge just how amazing a job has been done in the protection of life and the protection of Australian assets. And when you think about the 1 billion estimated animals that have died in this fire, that again reminds you just how incredible a job our firefighters and emergency services professionals have done. And out of every tragedy, people are driven to action. In New South Wales alone, tens of thousands of new volunteers have signed up to become firefighters, more than 6 times the national average. But this Australia's largest natural disaster has tested us, and we're reminded that the essence of being an Australian isn't a location, it isn't an accent, isn't a love of beer, it isn't being a bogan, and it isn't yelling a slogan. It's the ability to show compassion for one another, to help out, to do our bit. And every Australian has once again been reminded that we have so much more to do in mitigation and prevention. In Western Australia, we saw the Stirling Ranges burn for a week. The Goldfield fires disconnected Western Australia from South Australia for 12 days. And in our metropolitan area, communities in Rockingham, Lesmurdie, Kalamunda, Yanchep, Bullsbrook and more have had scares and sleepless nights. But we know that Western Australia has been lucky this bushfire season so far. But like many Western Australians, I look at the Darling Ranges which run along the back hills of Perth metropolitan area. These hills are an ever-visible presence across Perth. One day, I fear the hills, as we know them, will face the same fate as we have seen in New South Wales in recent weeks. An out-of-control fire on the edge of the Perth metropolitan area is our shared nightmare. Hoping these things won't happen is not enough. We must continue to invest in our fire services and prevention measures so that the only red glow we see over the Darling Range is the rising of the sun every morning. In my electorate of Perth, we saw the compassion of Australians for our brothers and sisters in the vast expanse that we refer to as the eastern states. Kids running bake sales, completely unapologetic for their aggressive pricing strategies. Small businesses donating their daily profits. Mayland's Amcal Pharmacy and Pika Bar, a beloved bar in the heart of Perth, just to name 2. And mine and Jess's local pub, the Rosemount Hotel, will be hosting a With Love from WA concert with a lineup of more than 50 acts on Sunday the 16th of February, with all profits going towards bushfire recovery. I also commend the Perth Mosque for the event they hosted in Hyde Park with guest of honour Governor Kim Beazley. raising funds for bushfire recovery. And of course note that there were 555 Western Australians sent to New South Wales, the great state of Queensland, to support the fire services, including firefighters and logistics support. Can't deny that the images that have gone across international television and been on the front pages of international newspapers have been images of a devastated Australia. I was struck by the sincerity and extent of the condolences that were passed on to the Australian delegation at the Asia Pacific Parliamentary Forum, which was hosted here in Canberra just a couple of weeks ago. It reminded me that we do need to send an international message that Australia will be and eventually is in recovery mode. The international visitors are still welcome. Indeed, the international visitors are needed for our economy and for our communities. Send the message that Australia is back in business. I encourage the Government and the Foreign Minister to consider a tour of the diplomatic corps to communities as they recover, of course at the appropriate time. This will allow the nations of the world, through their High Commissioners, Ambassadors and Consulates, to see that Australia is back in business. The model for this already exists. In 2011, following the Queensland floods, the Gillard Labor government did exactly this. I travelled with then Foreign Minister Rudd and representatives of some 80 countries as we shared the message that Queensland was back in business. It's now time to send the message that Australia is back in business. I do want to take the time to thank those countries who've offered aid. Too many countries to list. I got an exhaustive list from the Parliamentary Library. There were many, many countries who offered assistance. But I do want to pass on thanks to the Canadians, the United States and New Zealanders who did come here, many of whom are still here, to assist Australia, and the 350 international personnel of international military support that have assisted Australia in this time. We didn't want or need these fires. We didn't need them to remind us of the dangers of climate change. Again, science tells us the severity, frequency, intensity of such fires is one of the outcomes of global warming. Acting on climate change is in our national interest. I commend the comments from the member for Bennelong. He said that we can't say that this is a warning, this is a reality. Acting fast before other countries is how we build a safer Australia. Over the summer, those who deny climate change have become the quiet Australians. But the people who have been contacting me and the hundreds of emails I've received this summer about the fires, there has been anger, anxiety, tension and a desire that we do more in this decade than we achieved in the last decade. Carol from Bassendean wrote, "The fires have to be the biggest wake-up call the country has ever had." Laura from Bayswater in my electorate wrote, "My family do a lot to limit our carbon footprint. We commute by bike, we have solar panels on our roof, but without a sensible national policy, these personal actions, especially in light of recent bushfires, feel insignificant." And Jane from East Perth wrote that she wants to see deep and impactful policy that tackles climate change on multiple fronts. It's the only way we can avert further environmental degradation and extreme weather events. Deputy Speaker, I'll just add again my condolences to everyone who's been impacted by this horrible disaster, and again say that it's been a privilege to be in the chamber to hear so many beautiful speeches on both sides of the House as we collectively grieve as a parliament and as a nation. Thank you.